Stop scrolling, because the Washington quarter dollar in your pocket could be hiding a secret worth far more than 25 cents. Today we are uncovering the powerful history, rare varieties, and hidden value behind one of the most iconic coins ever struck in the United States. This is not just spare change, this is American history pressed into silver and metal, and some versions of this quarter have sold for thousands and even tens of thousands of dollars. Washington quarter was first released in 1932 to honor the 200th birthday of George Washington, and what began as a one-year commemorative coin turned into a long-running series that shaped U.S. coinage for generations. From the early silver strikes to wartime minting pressures, to rare errors that slipped past the mint, this coin tells a story of leadership, economic struggle, and quiet mistakes that created massive value. Many people spend these quarters every day without realizing that certain dates, mint marks, and metal compositions can transform an ordinary-looking coin into a collector treasure. Some were struck in pure silver, some were produced in extremely low numbers, and others carry errors so rare that collectors will fight to own them. In this video, we are diving deep into the Washington quarter dollar, uncovering how it was created, why it replaced earlier designs, what makes certain years incredibly valuable, and how to identify the rare ones before it is too late. If you have ever inherited coins, searched pocket change, or wondered if modern quarters could ever be valuable, this history will change how you see money forever. Stay with me until the end, because one Washington quarter variety shocked the numismatic world and proved that even the most common coin can become legendary. This is not just a quarter, this is a silent witness to American history and a potential hidden fortune waiting to be discovered. Imagine holding a single Washington quarter from 1966 in your hand and realizing that this small everyday coin carries the weight of one of the most dramatic turning points in American money history. Because 1966 was not just another year, and this was not just another quarter. This coin was born in a moment when silver was vanishing from circulation, when inflation fears were rising, when Americans were hoarding real metal, and when the United States government was forced to change the very definition of what money was made of. And the 1966 Washington quarter stands right at the center of that storm, telling a story of economic pressure, political decisions, public fear, and a quiet revolution that forever changed the coins in your pocket. Because this quarter was struck during the transition away from silver, marking a clear break between the old precious metal era and the modern clad age. And when you study the 1966 quarter, you are studying the moment America said goodbye to silver coins for everyday use and moved into a new monetary reality where copper and nickel replaced intrinsic value. And that shift was not smooth or simple. It was driven by rising silver prices, international demand, industrial use, and the realization that the metal inside coins was becoming worth more than the face value stamped on them, which led to hoarding, melting, and disappearing coinage across the nation. And the 1966 quarter emerged as a solution to a crisis, a coin designed to look familiar, feel familiar, and be trusted by the public, even though it no longer contains silver. And that is why the 1966 Washington quarter has no mint mark, because the U.S. Mint deliberately removed mint marks during these transition years to discourage collectors from pulling coins out of circulation and to make every quarter seem ordinary, even as history was being rewritten. And this decision alone makes the 1966 issue fascinating, because it represents a moment when the government tried to hide collectability in plain sight, and this quarter was struck at multiple facilities, yet carries no letter to reveal its origin, adding to its mystery and appeal. And beyond its composition, the design of George Washington by John Flanagan continued to project stability, tradition, and trust at a time when the nation was dealing with social change, economic uncertainty, and a rapidly evolving world. And when Americans looked at this quarter, they still saw the familiar face of the first president, even though everything behind that image had changed. And this coin circulated heavily, passing through gas stations, grocery stores, diners, jukeboxes, and toll booths, becoming part of everyday life while silently representing a massive shift in policy and economics, and the 1966 quarter also exists in special mints set form, a unique finish created during a period when traditional proof coins were temporarily discontinued, adding another layer of intrigue for collectors because these special mint set coins were neither true proofs nor regular circulation strikes, making them a product of experimentation, uncertainty, and adaptation. And that alone makes the 1966 Washington quarter a perfect symbol of a nation in transition. And as you dig deeper, you uncover stories of collectors who ignored these coins for decades only to rediscover them later, stories of errors, double dies, off-center strikes, and plankett mistakes that escaped during high-speed production, and stories of value that goes far beyond face amount when condition, rarity, and historical context come together. And this is why the 1966 Washington quarter deserves far more attention than it gets, because it is not about instant riches, but about understanding. A pivotal year when American coinage changed forever, and once you see this quarter not as spare change, but as a historical artifact, you will never look at your pocket coins the same way again. Because this single coin captures the end of one era and the beginning of another, and that is exactly why the story of the 1966 Washington quarter is not just numismatic history, but American history told through metal design, policy, and everyday life. And by the time you finish exploring this coin, you realize that something so small can reflect massive national decisions, and that is the power of the 1966 Washington quarter, and the reason it deserves a deep, detailed, and unforgettable place on your channel history that keeps viewers watching, learning, and appreciating every detail of this remarkable coin. As the story of the 1966 Washington quarter continues, it becomes impossible to separate this coin from the wider cultural and economic environment of the mid-1960s, because this was a period when America was changing rapidly, from the Vietnam War escalating overseas to social movements reshaping life at home, and all of this pressure flowed directly into the economy and into the coins people used every single day. And by 1966, the public had already noticed that silver quarters from earlier years were disappearing from cash registers and bank drawers, because people understood instinctively that silver had lasting value, and that knowledge spread quickly by word of mouth, by newspaper articles, and by simple observation. And the government realized that if silver coins continued to circulate, they would be hoarded, melted, and lost forever. And that forced lawmakers to take decisive action, leading to the Coinage Act of 1965, which officially removed silver from the quarter and replaced it with a copper core bonded to nickel-clad layers. And the 1966 Washington quarter was one of the earliest full-year products of that decision, making it a frontline example of the new system being tested under real-world conditions. And the mint had to strike enormous quantities of these quarters to replace what had vanished from circulation, which explains why the mintage numbers were so high and why quality control sometimes suffered under the pressure of speed and volume. And this intense production environment is exactly why collectors today search for sharp strikes, full details, and clean surfaces, because high-grade examples are far scarcer than raw numbers suggest. And when you examine the obverse closely, you see Washington's profile still dignified, still strong, with hair detail and facial lines that connect this coin directly to the original design introduced in 1932, but now those details are struck into a different metal, entirely changing the way light reflects and how wear appears over time. And on the reverse, the heraldic eagle with outstretched wings continues to symbolize national strength, yet the metal beneath it tells a new story, one of adaptation rather than tradition. And when these coins circulated, the public slowly adjusted to their lighter feel, their slightly different sound, and their resistance to hoarding, because they no longer carried precious metal value. And this adjustment was not immediate but gradual, and the 1966 quarter played a critical role in retraining the public to trust clad coinage and use it without hesitation. And another fascinating chapter in this coin's history lies in the special mint sets produced that year, which were created as a compromise between proof collectors and circulation needs. Because the mint temporarily halted traditional proofs to focus resources on circulating coinage and instead offered these special sets with higher quality strikes and satin-like finishes, and these coins now stand apart as unique artifacts of experimentation. Never fully repeated in the same way and highly studied by collectors who appreciate their subtle surfaces and historical context, and beyond official production, the 1966 quarter also has a quiet error market that continues to attract attention, including doubled lettering, misaligned strikes, clipped plankets, and other anomalies that slipped through during non-stop production runs, and each of these errors represents a tiny moment when machinery, human oversight, and speed intersected, creating something unintended and collectible. And as decades passed, these quarters became overlooked, ignored, and spent until only a fraction survived in pristine condition. And now, as modern collectors revisit the clad era with fresh eyes, the 1966 Washington quarter is being reevaluated not for silver content, but for historical weight, scarcity in top grades, and its role as a foundation piece of modern U.S. coinage. And when you build a long-form story around this coin, you are not just talking about metal and design. You are telling the story of how a nation responded to economic reality, how trust in currency was maintained. Imagine holding a single ordinary-looking Washington quarter from 1970 and realizing that this small piece of metal was born at one of the most dramatic turning points in American history, a year when the nation was torn by the Vietnam War, shaken by protests, mourning fallen leaders, and quietly transitioning its money from precious silver to modern clad coinage. The 1970 Washington quarter is not just spare change. It is a silent witness to a nation in motion, and in this story we are going to uncover how this coin connects the early dreams of America, the legacy of George Washington, the evolution of us money, and the powerful social and economic forces of the late 20th century. When you look at the obverse of the 1970 Washington quarter, you see the familiar profile of George Washington, designed by John Flanagan, a design first introduced in 1932 to honor the 200th anniversary of Washington's birth. But by 1970, this portrait had already seen nearly 4 decades of circulation. Through the Great Depression, World War II, the rise of America as a global superpower, and now into a turbulent era of cultural revolution, Flanagan's design shows Washington facing left, calm, steady, and resolute, symbolizing stability at a time when the country desperately needed it. The word liberty arches above his head, a powerful reminder of the ideals the nation was questioning and redefining during the late 1960s and early 1970s. The phrase "In God We Trust" appears beside his neck, added to the quarter in 1938, reflecting the moral foundation many Americans clung to during uncertain times. The date 1970 sits below, anchoring the coin firmly in a year when history was unfolding at a rapid pace. Turn the coin over, and you see the heraldic eagle with outstretched wings clutching arrows and olive branches, representing both the willingness to defend freedom and the desire for peace, an image that carried extra weight in 1970. As American troops were fighting overseas while peace movements filled the streets at home, above the eagle reads "United States of America" and "E pluribus unum." Out of many one, a phrase that felt both hopeful and challenged. During an era of deep national division, below the eagle is the denomination quarter dollar, simple, direct, and unchanged, yet the metal beneath those words tells a much deeper story, because by 1970 the Washington quarter was no longer made of silver. Earlier quarters minted before 1965 contained 90% silver, but rising silver prices forced the US Mint to transition to a copper-nickel clad composition. This change marked the end of circulating silver coinage in America and the beginning of a new monetary era. The 1970 quarter is composed of a pure copper core sandwiched between layers of copper-nickel, giving it a silvery appearance without the precious metal value. This shift fundamentally changed how Americans viewed their coins. No longer small stores of silver value, but tokens backed by trust. In the government and the economy, the 1970 Washington quarter was struck at 2 mints Philadelphia and Denver with no mint mark indicating Philadelphia, and a small D-mint mark indicating Denver. Millions were produced, making the coin common in circulation, yet within those millions exist varieties, errors, and conditions that collectors carefully study and pursue. Uncirculated examples with sharp details, original luster, and nowhere can command premiums, while proof versions struck in San Francisco for collectors showcase mirror-like fields and frosted devices. These proof coins were never meant for circulation. They were carefully struck and preserved, offering a pristine snapshot of the design as it was intended to be seen beyond minting numbers and metal composition. The true power of the 1970 Washington quarter lies in its historical context. This coin circulated through wallets and cash registers at a time when America witnessed the Kent State shootings, the expansion of the Vietnam War into Cambodia, the rise of environmental awareness with the first Earth Day, and rapid changes in music, fashion, and social values. Every scratch and worn edge on a circulated example tells a story of everyday life: gasoline purchases, grocery transactions, movie tickets, and newspaper stands, all paid for with quarters. Just like this one, the quarter was, and still is, a workhorse of American commerce. And in 1970, it played that role during one of the most emotionally charged years in modern history. For collectors today, the 1970 Washington quarter represents accessibility and education. It is affordable, yet rich with history, making it a perfect entry point into numismatics. It teaches lessons about design continuity, metal transitions, minting technology, and the relationship between money and society. It reminds us that even the most common objects can carry extraordinary stories. When we take the time to listen, this coin links the founding father George Washington to the modern age, connecting 18th century ideals with 20th century realities. And as you hold or view a 1970 Washington quarter, you are not just looking at a coin. You are holding a tangible piece of American history, a witness to change, resilience, and the ongoing story of a nation. And that is why this simple quarter deserves your attention, your curiosity, and your respect as we continue deeper into the story of the 1970 Washington quarter. It becomes clear that this coin is not just a product of its time, but a bridge between generations of Americans who experienced profound change through something as simple as everyday money. By 1970, the United States Mint had fully adapted to mass production of clad coinage, using high-speed presses, advanced dyes, and improved quality control, yet the quarter still carried the same familiar design that Americans trusted. This balance between innovation and tradition mirrored the nation itself, pushing forward technologically while holding tightly to its historical identity. The sound of a 1970 quarter dropping onto a counter was different from the older silver issues, lighter, less musical, yet it signaled progress and practicality. The government needed durable, affordable coinage to support a growing economy and expanding population. Vending machines, parking meters, laundromats, and payphones all relied heavily on quarters, and the 1970 Washington quarter became essential to modern life. Collectors today often overlook how heavily these coins were used and abused, which makes finding high-grade examples especially meaningful. Each uncirculated coin survived decades without entering commerce, preserved as if frozen in time, while most others were worn smooth through millions of transactions. The edge of the coin with its visible copper stripe became a defining feature of the post-silver era, instantly recognizable and symbolic of a major shift in American monetary policy. This copper core told a quiet story of inflation, rising metal prices, and economic realism, lessons that continue to resonate today within the collecting community. The 1970 Washington quarter is often studied for strike quality, luster, and subtle differences between mints. Philadelphia issues tend to show softer strikes, while Denver coins often display sharper details, especially in Washington's hair and the eagle's feathers. Proof coins from San Francisco represent the pinnacle of craftsmanship with deep mirrored fields, that reflect light like glass. These proofs were sold to collectors during a time when coin collecting was booming, fueled by public interest in history, investment, and hobby culture. The 1970s saw a surge in numismatics as Americans searched their change hoping to find silver coins or rare varieties, and although the 1970 quarter contained no silver, it still carried excitement and promise, especially for young collectors discovering the hobby. For the first time historically, this coin also reflects America's evolving relationship with its founding fathers. George Washington's image on the quarter served as a constant reminder of leadership, integrity, and sacrifice qualities many citizens longed for during an era of political distrust and social unrest. As protests filled campuses and confidence in institutions wavered, Washington's steady gaze offered reassurance and continuity, reinforcing the idea that the nation had faced turmoil before and endured. The quarter quietly reinforced national identity without speeches or slogans, simply by existing in the hands of millions, from factory workers to business owners, from students to soldiers. Every American shared this coin regardless of background or belief, and that shared experience gave it unifying power. Over time, the 1970 Washington quarter has become a historical artifact that allows modern viewers to step back into a pivotal moment in us history. It tells the story of economic transition, cultural upheaval, technological advancement, and enduring symbolism. It shows how a nation adapted its currency to survive changing realities while preserving the images and ideals that defined it for nearly 4 decades. And as you build a 2-hour deep dive around this coin, you can explore mint operations, die production, circulation patterns, grading standards, collector demand. Imagine holding a simple Washington quarter from 1973 in your hand, a coin so common that millions passed through gas stations, grocery stores, and payphones. Yet inside that small piece of copper nickel metal is a full story of America in motion. A nation healing from war, questioning authority, facing inflation, energy crises, and cultural change, all while its everyday money quietly reflected those pressures. This is not just a quarter. It is a time capsule struck during one of the most misunderstood years in modern U.S. history, a year when the mint was producing coins at massive scale, yet under intense pressure to modernize technology, control costs, and meet public demand. A year when collectors barely noticed what was happening, but decades later began to ask new questions about quality, errors, survival rates, and hidden value. The 1973 Washington quarter sits at the crossroads of tradition and transition, carrying the familiar profile of George Washington, designed by John Flanagan. Originally created in the 1930s to honor the bicentennial of Washington's birth, yet now circulating in an America that looked nothing like the one Flanagan knew by 1973. The country was post-silver coinage, post-gold standard, post-Vietnam, and deep into the era of fiat money, meaning this quarter was no longer precious for its metal but powerful for what it represented: trust, authority, and continuity. The obverse still showed Washington strong, calm, and steady, while the reverse eagle remained proud and symbolic, even as the nation itself was questioning leadership and institutions. This was the age of Watergate headlines, nightly news, and rising prices, where a quarter no longer bought what it once did, yet it still mattered deeply in daily life. Parking meters, vending machines, arcade games, and phone calls depended on it. The mint struck 1973 quarters in Philadelphia and Denver, producing hundreds of millions, because America needed change, literally and figuratively. And unlike earlier decades, no proof quarters were made for collectors in this year, making business strikes the only option and pushing collectors decades later to search circulation rolls for the best. Survivors' condition became everything, because mass production meant quality control suffered. Weak strikes, bag marks, die wear, and off-metal errors became part of the story. And this is where the 1973 quarter transforms from common change into a field of study. A coin where subtle differences in strike sharpness, mint luster, and die states can mean the difference between face value and serious collector interest. The Denver mint often produced softer strikes, while Philadelphia examples sometimes showed better detail, yet both facilities were racing to meet demand rather than perfection, and within that rush errors were born: double dies, off-center strikes, clipped blankets, and die cracks that today tell us how fast and hard those presses were running. This coin also lives in the shadow of what was coming, the bicentennial coinage, just a few years away, meaning the traditional eagle reverse was nearing the end of its long run, making the 1973 quarter part of the final chapter of a classic design era. Every worn example tells a story of circulation through a turbulent economy, while every high-grade survivor tells a story of chance preservation tucked away in a drawer, jar, or forgotten roll. And for collectors today, the hunt is not about silver or rarity alone, but about history, texture, context, and the thrill of finding excellence where few thought to look. The 1973 Washington quarter challenges the idea that only old coins matter. It proves that modern-era coinage still carries depth, drama, and discovery. And as we dive deeper into its minting process, historical backdrop, design, legacy, varieties, errors, and market evolution, you will see why this ordinary quarter deserves extraordinary attention, because sometimes the most overlooked coins are the ones that speak most honestly about who we were, where we were going, and how even the smallest change in your pocket can carry the weight of a nation. In a world where ordinary pocket change silently carries the weight of history, the 1977 Washington quarter stands as a quiet witness to America's evolving identity and the complex machinery of the United States Mint. And as we begin this deep journey into the life of the 1977 quarter, prepare to see how a simple coin becomes a storyteller, a reflection of national values, and a product of an era filled with economic pressures, technological challenges, and the lasting legacy of a coin design that had already spent more than 4 decades in circulation. The story of the 1977 Washington quarter begins long before the year itself, because to understand why this coin matters, you must first understand why the Washington quarter existed at all. Born in 1932 as a tribute to George Washington's 200th birthday, the quarter was intended to be a single-year commemorative, but public admiration and political practicality quickly transformed it into a permanent design featuring John Flanagan's portrait that would remain largely unchanged for more than 60 years. By the time 1977 arrived, the Washington quarter had already become one of America's most recognized and circulated coins, serving as an economic backbone in everyday commerce. So the creation of the 1977 issue began in a country facing inflation, rising prices, and intense demands on the mint to keep up with the circulation needs of a growing population. The mint had long transitioned from silver coinage to the copper-nickel-clad composition that began in 1965, and by 1977 the public had fully adjusted to the new metallic identity of America's quarters. And yet behind the scenes, every year brought its own challenges: new die refinements, UPDATED machinery, changing metal costs, and ongoing struggles to perfect the clarity of details in George Washington's portrait and the heraldic eagle on the reverse. The Philadelphia Mint, responsible for the largest share of circulation quarters in 1977, was working at full speed, presses running almost continuously to meet the needs of the national economy. The 1977 Philadelphia quarter carried no mint mark, as was tradition before the early 80s, and its sheer output made it one of the most common quarters of the late 20th century. However, common does not mean uninteresting, and collectors today still study subtle variations in strike strength, luster, metal flow lines, and the occasional mint error that slipped through the process, adding dimension to a coin that millions held without a second thought. The Denver Mint also struck 1977 quarters marked with the familiar D, and their production environment added its own nuances. Differences in blanket preparation, die, aging, and striking pressure create visible distinctions that collectors can identify when comparing Philadelphia and Denver coins side by side. The 1977 D quarter often shows bolder mint marks, but like its Philadelphia counterpart, it reflects the characteristics of machinery that had been modernized yet still bore the personality of manual adjustments and daily challenges faced by mint staff. While no proof coins were struck at San Francisco for circulation in 1977, the Mint did produce clad proof sets featuring the 1977 quarter with a mirror finish and frosted cameo designs. These proof coins captured the artistry of Flanagan's portrait in a way that circulation strikes simply could not. The deep mirrored fields and sharp frosted relief revealed just how detailed the original design truly was underneath the wear and flattening caused by constant circulation. And when you study the 1977 quarter, you uncover the story of America's post-Vietnam era, a nation navigating new economic realities and entering a period defined by shifting cultural priorities. Yet the quarter remained unchanged, reliable, and familiar, a symbol of continuity in a time of uncertainty. The Mint's records from the era reflect the pressures of increasing demand for small denomination currency as vending machines, parking meters, and daily consumer habits all relied heavily on quarters, driving production numbers higher and making the 1977 issue one of the most widely circulated coins of its decade. But beyond economics, the 1977 Washington quarter carries a subtle artistic story, because even as the Mint pushed massive production runs, they were also contending with gradual wear on the master hubs that created the dies slowly softening details in Washington's hair, losing the crispness of the eagle's feathers, and altering the visual character of the coin compared to earlier decades. These changes were not intentional, yet they became part of the historical fingerprint of late 70s quarters, giving modern collectors insights into production trends and mint technology of the time. And when examining surviving high-grade examples, particularly those that reached mint state 67 or above, collectors see the rare beauty of a fully struck 1977 quarter. Bright cartwheel luster, sharp rims, bold details, and clean surfaces demonstrate the small share of coins that escaped bag marks, handling friction, and the rough realities of high-volume distribution channels. Because most 1977 quarters were sent directly into heavy circulation, only a tiny percentage remain in pristine condition, making high-grade survivors surprisingly valuable despite the coin's overall common mintage. And then there are the errors and varieties that spark fascination in today's collecting world. Coins struck on defective plankets, clipped plankets, weak strikes, off-center strikes, die cracks, and the popular filled mint mark effect on some 1977 quarters. Each of these represents a moment in mint history, a mechanical hiccup, a striking misalignment, or a metal preparation flaw frozen forever in a small copper-nickel disc that collectors now seek, because errors turn mass-produced currency into unique individual relics. And to understand the full legacy of the 1977 quarter, you must see it not merely as a coin, but as a product of its era, reflecting the United States Mint's effort to maintain consistency during years when costs were rising. Efficiency was critical, and the long-standing Washington design was beginning to face its final decades before modern redesigns would arrive in the late 90s with the state quarter program. The 1977 quarter stands at the crossroads between the old world of American coinage and the coming era of commemorative circulating designs. And when you hold a 1977 quarter, you hold the quiet continuity of everyday American life embedded in metal. From gas stations to grocery stores, bus fares to arcade machines, millions of people use these coins without ever imagining the complexity of their creation or the historical context behind them. Yet every detail, from the rim to the relief, from the texture of the eagle's wings to the subtle curvature of Washington's profile, tells a story about the Mint's craftsmanship and the era's economic climate. And as we dive deeper into its background, its production, its varieties, and its survival today, the 1977 Washington quarter emerges as more than a coin. It becomes a lens into American history, a widely circulated ambassador of a nation transitioning into modern economic territory, and a preserved artistic tribute to its first president, George Washington. The story of the 1977 quarter is not one of rarity, but of significance, a reminder that every coin, no matter how ordinary, carries the legacy of the year it was born, its design rooted in national pride, its metal crafted through industrial precision, its journey shaped by millions of hands, and that is why the 1977 Washington Quarter deserves to be studied, appreciated, and remembered not as a simple piece of change, but as a historical artifact that tells us who we were, what we valued, and how the United States Mint helped shape the financial rhythm of everyday American life. In the vast world of American coinage, there are certain years that slip quietly into circulation, yet hold within them a story far richer than most collectors realize, and the 1978 Washington Quarter is one of those coins, a small silver-colored piece of metal that millions of hands have touched, but few have ever truly understood. And as we begin this long, deep professional journey into its history, imagine yourself stepping back into the late 1970s, into a nation wrestling with inflation, energy crises, cultural shifts, and a rapidly changing economy, because coins minted in this era did not simply emerge as faceless currency, but as historical snapshots forged in the tension and transformation that defined the decade. And the 1978 Washington Quarter stands as a perfect example of this connection between everyday money and the pulse of America. And to understand this quarter, you must first understand the legacy of the Washington Quarter itself, conceived in the early 1930s as part of the bicentennial celebration of George Washington's birth, chosen to replace the standing Liberty Quarter, and designed by sculptor John Flanagan, whose portrait of Washington would go on to become one of the longest-running designs in American numismatics. The Washington Quarter had already been in circulation for over 40 years by the time 1978 arrived, and throughout those decades, the quarter had seen tremendous change. From its early years as a 90% silver coin to its modern clad composition introduced in 1965, when rising silver prices forced the United States Mint to shift away from precious metal coinage. And it is within this evolving backdrop that the 1978 issue takes shape, a coin struck at the Philadelphia and Denver mints, though only the Denver coins carry a mint mark, because Philadelphia would not use the P mark on quarters until 1980, and so every 1978 quarter from Philadelphia bears no mint mark at all, and millions of these coins flowed from the presses, but their abundance does not diminish their importance, because the characteristics of their design, their production quality, and their role in American commerce provide a deeper narrative worth exploring at length. And as we move deeper into the late 1970s, we see a mint system focused on consistency, mechanical precision, and durability. The copper-nickel clad composition of the quarter became a reliable choice because it resisted wear far better than the older silver issues, and at a time when the United States was expanding vending machines, toll systems, public transit token exchanges, and automated retail devices, the quarter had become one of the most essential coins in daily life, and the 1978 issue played a central role in this rapidly modernizing economy. While the coin retained the familiar Washington portrait on the obverse and the heraldic eagle on the reverse, the aesthetic of these coins subtly reflected the machining improvements of the era, with sharper RIMS bolder lettering and a more uniform strike, especially among the Denver minted coins, which were often considered more consistent than their Philadelphia counterparts. And yet, throughout these small visual and technological details lies a deeper human story. For every quarter pressed at the mint represented hours of design preservation, countless engravers' adjustments, die polishing sessions, and equipment calibration, all happening behind the scenes to ensure that each coin carried forward the traditional dignity of George Washington's image and the national symbolism expressed through the eagle. And as collectors study these coins carefully, they notice the neckline of Washington, the definition of his hair, the spacing of the lettering, the clarity of E pluribus unum, and the precision of the talons clutching arrows and olive branches. Each detail becomes a marker of the craftsmanship of the time and the dies used in 1978. We're nearing the end of a long design era, only a few years before major changes would begin sweeping American coinage, with the state quarters program looming on the horizon, though no one yet knew how dramatically the Washington Quarter would be transformed. And this makes the 1978 coin one of the final chapters in the long stretch of original reverse design continuity that had lasted since 1932, a remarkable 46 years of nearly unaltered artistry, and every collector who holds a 1978 quarter today is holding a piece of that sustained tradition. And as we dive deeper into the public's interaction with this coin, we see a nation in financial transition. Inflation in the late 70s meant that the value of money was shifting. And the quarter, which had once purchased a great deal more, was increasingly becoming a bare minimum unit of cost. Vending machines, once operating at a dime or 15 cents, began adjusting upward. Parking meters, transit systems, arcade machines, and pay phones all relied heavily on the quarter, and the demand for quarters surged accordingly, making the 1978 mintage not just a formality but a necessity for the functioning of daily American life. And within this demand, the mint had to maintain high output, ensuring that the presses worked at steady and reliable rates, producing well-struck coins with accurate plankett weight, exact metal mixture, and proper collar diameter, all factors that today influence how collectors judge the quality of surviving examples from this year, and errors found among these coins illustrate the immense pressure placed on machinery during mass production. For instance, off-center strikes, die cracks, clogged lettering, weak strikes, and tilted plankets occasionally appeared, and while these errors were rare, compared to total volume, they today form some of the most sought-after 1978 quarter varieties for collectors who appreciate the interplay between industrial precision and organic unpredictability. And as we continue to explore the environments surrounding this coin, we must also understand the national mood of 1978. Americans were experiencing a blend of uncertainty and optimism. Popular culture was shifting from the gritty realism of the early 70s to the emerging vibrancy of the 80s, and while the government grappled with economic challenges, there remained a sense of unity in tradition and stability, and nothing symbolized that everyday stability more than American coinage. Always present, always dependable, always a reminder of history and national identity. And in this sense, the Washington Quarter 1978 issue served not only as a tool of commerce but as an anchor linking modern America to its foundational story through the image of its first president and the proud eagle of its national seal. And when collectors today examine a 1978 quarter in mint state condition, they see the culmination of decades of minting experience. Crisp hairlines on Washington, bold wing feathers on the eagle, clean fields with minimal contact marks, evidence of strong striking pressure, and carefully prepared dies, all showcasing the excellence that the mint achieved even during periods of economic strain. And as we expand this historical journey over the span of 2 hours, we dive into the metallurgical science behind the coin, exploring its copper core and nickel cladding, the way these metals bond under pressure, the temperature and torque involved in die striking, the sound a freshly minted quarter makes when dropped onto a metal tray, the way plankets are washed, dried, and inspected before entering the coining press, and how minor differences in alloy can influence toning, luster, and long-term preservation. And we examine the societal rituals that surrounded the quarter in 1978, whether it was children feeding quarters into arcade machines playing Pac-Man or Space Invaders, or everyday workers using pay phones to call home, or families enjoying vending machine snacks during road trips, or drivers keeping a stash of quarters for toll booths. Each moment created memories tied to this small coin, and each memory is part of its living historical value. And as we travel through these dimensions of economic culture, artistic design, industrial process, and national identity, we give the 1978 Washington Quarter its full story, a story far deeper than many might imagine, a story that stretches from the founding of the nation to the intricate machinery of the 20th century mint, and right into the hands of millions of Americans whose daily lives were shaped in small but meaningful ways by this circulating piece of national heritage. And by the end of this long exploration, we understand that the 1978 Washington Quarter is not merely a coin, but a Time capsule, a witness to American resilience, a symbol of continuity, and a testament to the subtle artistry of coinage that so often goes unnoticed, and yet when we stop to observe, appreciate, and study it, we reveal a depth that can fill hours of storytelling, reflection, and discovery, all anchored in this single year and this single coin, the Washington quarter of 1978.